Hello everyone, and welcome to the Young Vic and to the INNOVATE Legacy and Learning Symposium opening address. My name is Melanie, I'm the learning producer at the Young Vic, and this evening we'll situate the INNOVATE project in the history and the values of the Young Vic and discuss the role that theatre and the arts play in the curriculum, school life and learning. So a few notes before we begin. The first is that there are 20 free events over the course of this week, so if you haven't already, have a look in your programme and book on to anything that you'd like to come to. We'd really like to share this with as many teachers and students and artists that could benefit and that are interested in being a part of this conversation. We have 2 hashtags for you to share your thoughts and reflections and to keep the conversation going about the symposium and about this work. And the first is INNOVATE Symposium, and the second is Connections Through Culture. This symposium was co-designed with elements co-designed with the Create Centre, is supported by the British Council's Connections Through Culture programme. We also have 2 resource boxes. These are going to grow over the course of the symposium, and they're beginning to be filled with resources that our artists made with teachers during the course of the project. So please come and have a look. And if you are somebody that has an artist or a teacher that might have a resource that you would like to share across the week, there are instructions on how to do so. And now it's a joy to hand over to our wonderful artistic director, QianEr.
Thank you so very much, and I promise you my mobile phone won't go off. Please forgive me that I'm not there with you in person. I'm here in Hamburg opening a show. So, but I so wanted to be in there because INNOVATE and all of our work with and within schools is deeply important to us as a theatre and to me as an artistic director. The learning strand in all of its iteration has been an intrinsic part of the work we do here at the Wiley for kind of 27 years. Often, young people's first experience of theatre is through their school, and our dedication to being a welcoming and inclusive building that nurtures artists from school to adulthood is kind of deep in our foundation. This project wouldn't have been possible, however, without the artists and the teachers who boldly collaborated on this project in the classroom, that experimented with art, pedagogy, and curriculum to enhance, develop, and transform learning experiences for young people. This simply is me just writing a love letter to you, the trailblazers and pioneers that paved the way for this work, and to the artists and the teachers that continue to use the arts to foster critical thinking, self-expression, independence, collaboration, understanding, focus, joy, and so much more in learning. At a time when we know that one of the big fights is making sure that arts education really has space in the curriculum. I salute all of you who are in this room today because I know that you're doing God's work. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a good few hours. I'm going to hand over to our brilliant executive director, Lucy. Thank you.
Hello, people. Thanks, Quams. It's really, really down to me to extend an incredibly warm welcome to you all to the Young Vic. I'm just going to place this work in the context of the Young Vic, and specifically in the context of the Young Vic's values, and I have a feeling some words are going to recur through tonight and through the week. The Young Vic has 7 core values that run through everything that we do. I'm going to read them to you. We believe that theatre is best when everyone participates. We are driven by relentless curiosity and debate. We believe in pioneering and leading into the unknown. We are led by the creativity of our people and the limitless possibility of imagination. We collaborate, working together towards shared goals. We lead with kindness, heart, and care. And finally, we are committed to openness rooted in trust. And nowhere are these values more threaded than through the Taking Part team, which, as the report says, is the beating heart of the Young Vic. And through this work, through the learning work so beautifully conjured in the INNOVATE work and in that report, that is so true. And I speak for all of my Young Vic colleagues when I say how proud we are of this team, the learning strand, the collaboration with schools. All the qualities that define great artists are those that can be confined in children, in my opinion. Wildness, curiosity, fearlessness, rule-breaking, questioning, disruption, individualism, originality, a kind of madness, innovation, basically. That's what we seek and try and foster in our artists. I've worked with them my whole career. All those qualities are true. And what was very, very beautiful about this project and this work is it used all of those qualities to shift the way that children not only learn the arts curriculum, but, as you know, learn across the curriculum. And there is a way to conjure those things that is really instrumental in the way people learn. Artists also have a really beautiful relationship with failure. They know that it is critical to becoming who you are. Again, qualities that should really be placed for in learning spaces. And the words that really pop out in the report over and again are trust, empathy, and the legacy of this kind of work. And I'm sure we'll talk more about some of those things today. Critically, I think that this idea of collaboration, of creating a rich learning environment, that comes out in the report. And these words really popped out to me. Collaborative programming, creating together, changing the dynamic, and matching the energies. Those are just some thoughts that really stayed with me. And most importantly, why I love art and artists and the work we do here is not that it teaches you what to think, but it teaches you how to think. And if we can use the tools that we have to help young people, to help all of us with how we think, then we've done something good. So those are some of my reflections on this beautiful project and the outcomes from it. And I'm delighted to hand over to Sue Emmers, who is our Associate Artistic Director and who will reflect on her journey and the history of some of this work.
Thank you. So the work with schools at the Young Vic has gone through many developments since I've been here, but it's always been at the heart of who we are and what we believe in, and I've been here a very long time. Guesses can be made later. When I joined under David Thacker's leadership, there was the Young People's Theatre and Education Unit was established, and it was there to build links with the local communities and explore and respond to the educational needs of young people by establishing a wide range of accessible, challenging and stimulating work for young people under the age of 26. And that was in 1991. The YPTEU became the slightly easier to say Youth and Education Unit a little while later, for obvious reasons. And on offer were resource packs, workshops around the plays, tours to schools, a youth theatre, page-to-stage, on-stage workshops, and on-set text, and teachers' weekends. And all of that was brilliant stuff, and I was lucky to be part of it as the coordinator of that unit. But it didn't focus on where we were based in Lambeth and Southwark. It was designed to be income generating. It was pretty scattergun in its approach, and if I may, with the greatest of respect to those, and myself included, involved, it was sometimes more led by the creative interest of the artists by actually the needs of the recipients. So when Tim Supple and Julia Barsley joined the Young Vic in 1993, they dismantled all of the above to great furore. With Tim and Julia came a desire to take nothing for granted and to engage in deep conversations about what theatre is. They wanted the theatre to be more exploratory, collaborative, and diverse in its outlook and thinking. The first years were really rocky, dangerous even. We actually lost most of our audience through the first year or so. But it was truly risky, headstrong, and it felt adventurous. Happily at the time, there was a renewed desire to invest in the arts with an Arts Council initiative called Arts for Everyone in 1995. There were big pots of money to be had for ideas and schemes that did exactly what it said on the tin. It made people feel that theatre was for them and encouraged participation. And from this thinking was born TPR. The Young Vic loves acronyms, as you can tell, which stood for Teaching, Participation and Research. The R in the name was deliberately opaque. It begged the question, what is it? And that was aimed to circumvent the often dismissive approach to work with young people and schools. It invited a dialogue and for people to ask why. So it was an open admission in terms of the R of research that we didn't know everything, that we wanted to go through a process of discovery and change. The principles were that the Young Vic was a place of teaching and learning for everyone, where actors, directors, designers could develop their thinking, their craft, and the productions that we created would be shaped by working with teachers and young people. So work in schools would be led by the creative artists who produced the work in the theatres. Funded tickets would provide access to schools and local residents if they were unable to afford a ticket, and we'd give priority to those for whom theatre would be their first experience of coming to the Young Vic. So back in 1995, you'll all be guessing how long I've been here, we said the focus for TPR would be, it had to be integral to the identity of the theatre and our creative life. We wanted to expand and enrich young people's experience of the magic and power of theatre and provide an opportunity to develop their understanding and craft of making theatre. Through teaching, we would learn ourselves. It was a means of improving our own knowledge of telling stories, and the responses and reaction of the participants and the audiences would inform our creative thinking and truly become part of our working process. So it was a true dialogue. We'd enter into the conversations with teachers and pupils had to be sustained and, I can never say that word, reciprocal. I said it, good. And that was a really important relationship. And we wanted to recognise that everybody was an expert. So artists, teachers, pupils, they'd share their experience, their perceptions, their understandings. And most vitally, everything would be free of charge. So maybe we didn't always achieve all of the above, but that's what really fueled our thinking. And as I said, the research strand had at its core a desire to learn about how we tell stories. And to do that, we needed partners. And we found a wealth of teachers who were excited and generous to go on that journey with us. One of the key strands of work was show development. So before and during rehearsal periods, we went into schools with the actors and the creative team to work with pupils to explore and explode the kind of story, the characters, the themes, the language, the aesthetic. And it's fair to say that Tim Supple's Grim Tales would never have existed without the trust and expertise of Henry Fawcett Primary School in Southwark. And the subsequent Christmas shows like Rufus Norris's Tintin would never have been such exceptional pieces of work without the classes of children that used to come in and visit the rehearsal rooms. So it was a conversation, asking people what matters most to them, to create environments where people can be themselves, to express themselves. The learning and listening we craved only happened because of the support of teachers, and these are just a few among many, like Helen Everett, Ros Lines, Kate Turvey, and schools such as Sacred Heart, Johanna Primary School, and even then Dunraven. There's always been pressure of time in schools, but these visionary teachers recognised the value of the arts and the impact of creative learning and was generous enough to give us all of their knowledge and resources. So then, in 2008, we moved into yet another acronym, TP, Taking Part, where we now are. There's no longer an R in the title, but it still has that essential sense of taking nothing for granted at its heart, and that's what INNOVATE, to me, does. It beautifully manifests the golden thread of wanting to engage, learn, share, and explore. And this is why TP continues to have such a massive influence on the theatre industry, and people look to the work of Shereen, Mel, Alicia, Alea, Michelle, and all that have worked in the department before, such as Lorna, who's here today, and also Dan. Our relationship, just because I've seen you, Dan, so I thought I'd give you a shout out. Forgive me if I've missed anybody else. So our relationship with schools and their teachers has been central to who we are as a theatre, and INNOVATE continues that tradition. Shereen's going to talk in more depth about the department's present work, but I think the impact for TP for me is summed up in something that Helen Everett, a teacher at a Southwark school, said. She said, "I always remember a conversation between two 16-year-old students as they waited for a play to begin. They were discussing how sometimes members of the audiences gave them a funny look. And one of them said, 'Yeah, when they do that, I look right back at them and think to myself, don't look at me like that. This theatre's mine, and it's where I belong.'" Thank you. I'll hand to Shereen.
Hello. Hello. Hi, I'm Shereen. I'm the director of Taking Part. And I just want to say before we start, this is Sumayya, the amazing, amazing sign artist. Is she not doing amazing? So first of all, I'm going to start. I see Dan and Liz chatting in the background, obviously, about my amazing outfit, which has to be given up. But yeah, so I'm the director of Taking Part at Young Vic, and I've been here for about 5.5 years. And INNOVATE is really special to me, as this is one of the projects that I pitched in my interview. And really, for anyone who does interviews and they're like, oh, there was, I'll come up with an idea and a project and various things, rarely do you get to do the blue sky idea. And so the fact that we're sitting here however many years later and I've done the idea is pretty damn cool, I have to say. Like, this feels unreal, but it's okay, I've had a little bit of wine, so it feels less unreal. And I went into that interview with so much hope. That was a pre-pandemic year. And there was so much hope I had, and I still do. And there was something about INNOVATE and its report, and it's talking about its opportunistic moments. And I absolutely grabbed the opportunity of making INNOVATE happen once the pandemic happened. You know, there was something around going, we have to look at what we've done to look at what we now need to do. And so what I won't say is that we're sitting here and we're like, oh, we innovated something completely new that has never been done before. Absolutely, this has been done before by so many great people, and this the process of this has been borrowed by, obviously, Dorothy Heathcote-Manty of The Expert and Process Drama, and all of the people who know that work and make that work often in primary schools, in places where we mix up different subjects, and then we go into secondary schools and it's like, oh no, actually you have to silo that and you have to keep things compartmentalized, and then as we as adults, we then have to compartmentalize things. And I actually feel like life is not that black and white. There's so much color in that, and I feel like this was our opportunity in INNOVATE to mix some of that and to challenge some of that. And the last couple of years, we've managed to do that. And so in the pandemic, I very luckily had a team who was willing to plan and dream with me at a time where we felt like things were very disparate, and we were like, actually, let's use this opportunity to move forward. And I think, and we had that planning day with Lorna, who's here today, and we actually sat in the office. I don't think we were meant to be here. But anyway, it was like in that local lockdown in like November 2020. And we were like, okay, we're going to figure this out and we're going to make something happen, and we're going to go into schools. And we spoke with Helen Nicholson, who's here today, and we were like, how can we make this happen? You know, and we spoke with the execs who were there at the time, and we were just like, this is the kind of money that we need to make this happen. And everyone at that time was like, cool, we're at a reset. And there is something about that makes me go, how can we make a reset happen every couple of years without a global pandemic, preferably, so that we start to challenge the way that we think and the way that we make work and the things that we do, because we sit in a place where we make work and we're like, what is the precedent for that? And who's done that before? And how is that tested before? And actually, like, what if you just do something that you haven't done before, but then has kind of the undercurrent and the basis of work already, like research already that like supports that. And so it was very important to make Innovate happen, but it was also important to have the research alongside it, because we knew as the years went on, everyone would be like, this is really great, but then people forget and memories forget. And so at least we have that research there to say, okay, this is what we did in that 2 years, and this is how we made that happen, and we're going to be very transparent and honest about that. And I think that's really important to do. And sitting in a space of transparency and honesty, I will say that I personally was not really into school. And I absolutely was the kid that got thrown out because I wanted to hang out with the sixth formers. So I just was like always being sent out of class, and I wasn't really listening. But there were things that really made me learn, and there's things I learned to this day, or remember to this day, because of the way I learned. I always think about the fact of, recently when I went to Cancun, and I knew 1 to 10 in Spanish. That was because I learned it through song. And I was like, oh, okay, like this is something that sticks in my brain. And so it seems like, a brag. But I'm also saying that, like, actually, if you think back to how we all learn, we have all kept things in our head through what we have learned through often the arts, through song, through dance, through movement, through using something that wouldn't be seen as traditionally the way to learn, which, is often the banking system of education, which is another story for another time. But I, created this program, and then it came to the listening days. And there was a point where I was like, okay, cool, I'm going to go to listening days. And it was in Dunraven, and I live in North West London, so it was a bit journey. But you go in the morning, and then you get up, and you get there. And there was a point where I was like, cool, I'm getting there. And I sit in a science class, and it was like 8-something a.m. And I went, oh my gosh, what have I done? I'm back in school. How have I done that to myself? But it was all right. And it was something that made me go, I need to be back in this space so that I remember who I felt in that space, so I can create a program that was for people like me who felt like actually classes like science and maths were not as easy for me to understand. And so there is something about going back and sitting in your younger version of yourself to be able to feed into the future versions of everybody else. Because often we forget who we are as a child, and we grow up and we think that, oh, these things should be easy and we should work this out and yada, yada, yada. And so there is something about going through every process of this over the last 2 years that has benefited me as an individual, has benefited my team as an individual, but also made me really understand how important education is. Helen Nicholson, when she came to me and said, this is a great project, but, loads of people come with great projects all the time, and she was very importantly challenging and was like, what would you see as your successes things? And there's always going to be funders who say, these are the benchmarks and this is it. And I said, do you know what would be amazing? And I think that people forget this when we are just in the rat race of life, is do you understand that we could make something where a young person could go into a classroom and be like, I now understand this. I now understand this arithmetic. I now understand this formula. And that could impact the rest of their life of how they now understand anything, and how they understand critical thinking, how they apply that to whatever career they decide to do. So, of course, it's important for the advocacy for the arts. It's important for the advocacy of more art subjects in schools. But I really feel like it's really important for us to advocate more and more for how the arts apply to everything in schools. And actually, it's intrinsic as part of what schools are to inform creativity in everything we do. And that's kind of why we've done the 2 years. That's why we're doing this week. And hopefully that's why all of you are here, because you feel that as well. Innovate obviously is a place-based project, and we don't gatekeep. A lot of people, when we announce the research, a lot of people have come and said, how can you come and do this in our school and where we are? And we encourage everybody to do that in their local community and do that with their local schools, because it is the locality that makes something like this project work. And I think it's so important that we sit in a place, and hopefully everyone feels throughout this week, we're not sitting in a place where we're saying we know everything and we're teaching you. We're saying, please come and hear what our experience was, but also please come and share what your experience has been, because I think the more that we learn and share with each other, the more that we really come together in as a community, and I think the world needs more of that at the moment. We love signposting people, so please let us know of any brilliant educational projects that you know of that are near you and are around you, and so we'll do that. And I'll end this with a call to action that will permeate throughout the week, which is, can we replicate this in our own communities, boroughs and schools to further the reach of educative collaboration through the arts? Thank you.
Thank you. What beautiful, beautiful opening addresses. And now it's a joy to invite the panel to the stage. So first of all, I'm going to invite our chair, Dr. Sylvan Baker. The Young Vic's Executive Director, Lucy Davies. The Young Vic's Associate Artistic Director, Sue Emmers. The Young Vic's Director of Taking Part, Shereen Jasmin Phillips. The Head of Learning and Participation at Hackney Empire, Lorna McGinty. And I'm going to go over there too.
So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sylvan Baker, and as you've just heard from Mel, I've been gifted the opportunity to chair a conversation. My day job is I'm a lecturer in community performance and applied theatre at Central School of Speech and Drama, which I think allows me to still be a researcher. This research thing's really important, particularly when you put it into dialogue with creative activity and arts. People tend to go, what you're doing is great. But when does the research start? So I think it's really important that we stick a pin in the fact that some of these practices, some of these activities, some of these projects are not just that, but they are also research. Off my soapbox. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to go much further. I'm going to jump in. And I've got just a few questions, and then we're going to throw the space open to you. And there was this thing where we were literally going to throw the microphone around, but I think in throwing it around I broke it. So we're going to use a conventional, more microphonic, tis a word, technique, where if you have a question when it comes to it, just bear with us a second as we get the microphone to you so that we can hear you in all of your glory. But that's coming up later. I'm going to go straight in with the first question. And this is the only question for this little bit, which I'm going to ask everybody to think about answering and coming back to. Apologies, I'm being heckled by my own throat. So, esteemed panel, what do you think, what is the role of theatre and performance in the curriculum, in school life and learning? So we're going to start with a really easy question. What do you think is the role of theatre or performance, creativity, I guess, in the curriculum, in school life, and coming off, Shereen, what you just said about it doesn't need to sit in a silo, in learning? I'm still talking to give you a little bit of thinking time.
I just spoke, so it should be someone else.
So sometimes when you're facilitating these kinds of things, there is a phenomenon that a young person gave me, which is called creeping death. Creeping death is that we start in one place, and then it goes there, and then it goes there. And so you're sitting there going, it's coming. So I'm inviting us to not go to creeping death, but to go to the alternative which they suggested, which is popcorn, which means that any one of you can speak.
Creeping life. My instinctive response to that question, not being an expert in this field, but being a person who has worked in theatre all my life, is that theatre performance, creative work is instinctively kind of interdisciplinary and kind of so within that work you will have history and you will have philosophy and you will have maths and maybe a bit of science and you will have, it's one of those instinctive lenses, I guess. And this isn't even before you even get into the tools, which you all will be much more articulate about than I, But for me, through the work that we do, through the forms that we use, you can go everywhere in the mind.
So this is already a combined, collaborative, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary process. Sue, I can see you
It was just
raring.
jumping on what Lucy said, is that, because what I do now is mostly artist development, and I think, and then you ask, why do people make theatre? And I think for me, it's, you make theatre about the things you don't understand, about the things that you're trying to find an answer to, that you're wrestling with. And therefore, that's why theatre can be so brilliant within a school setting and young people, because it's enabling and inviting that sense of let's get into the unknown and let's look round the corner and let's, what do I not understand about my life, my humanity, my relationships with other people? And that's why it should sit really strongly within a young person's setting, whether it's in school, outside of school, but it should be part of their everyday life.
And would you put that on top of everything? So it's like, it should be part of a young person's life, which is actually bigger than the curriculum. It's bigger than school life. It just should be there. Yeah?
I would.
Anybody else want to jump in on that?
I was going to say there's also something about teaching's very theatrical, and there's something quite performative about a classroom and where you sit and how you sit and how you interact. And actually, there's something really special about it. I'm thinking of some of the INNOVATE experiences of artists and teachers, and there was something very special about how they navigated that space and how they used theatre and the conventions of theatre to create a state and work through different styles of learning. One of our artists did this really lovely, would recreate the classroom to signify a particular state that would help students to know, okay, today's revision. Okay, another day we're going to have some awkward conversations because it's science and we're going to talk about this, so we're going to sit in a very specific way that helps us to feel more comfortable. And by using actually those conventions, there was a really lovely connection between I suppose it's the form of how you take that curriculum and you learn.
I think there's something really important there about the fact that theatre, in the way that it's made in this, we are in community, in collaboration, embarking on a journey to discover something that's very specific to the people, the time and the people in that space. It's co-constructed, and it's co-constructed by those people, therefore it's relevant for those people. So we're all on this collaborative learning journey that feels pertinent and relevant, and I think that's useful, really useful in the classroom, in this sort of emergent, co-constructed discovery, where there's also room for, I think, Lucy, you mentioned failure and playful, let's try something out, and if it doesn't work, great, because we're going to learn something from that. And I think often in school formal learning settings, there's not enough space for failure and play and exploration, and I think that's where the sort of a theatrical performative approach can be really useful in education.
And post-pandemic, a lot of the teachers in both INNOVATE schools spoke about how there was an increase in students not wanting to get things wrong. So not wanting to even scribble something out in their book, because then their book would look wrong and they got the wrong answer. And that being really, really, really something that they were trying to break, because they weren't taking any risks and they didn't actually they didn't want to try something out, they just wanted to get it right. And having loads of space to play really helped with that.
It's interesting, something about these overlaying of right and wrong, failure and risk, and they're put together so that they can be really destabilising, really shocking, because, stick my neck out, I think it's eminently possible to get theatre wrong, to get it really, really wrong. But what's really interesting about that is I thought it was going to do this, and it didn't. Oh. Lorna, you wouldn't come in. Shereen, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I would definitely say that there is something that I also personally feel about just backing that right versus wrong thing. Hi, come in. Come in and sit down. I feel like we make these things so awkward, but come in and sit down. There is something about theatre that feels let's not disrupt someone, but it's completely fine. Just imagine you're in my living room and we're just chilling. Watching Housewives. What was that? I know, in my mind, I'm living my housewives reunion.
Does that make me an honorary housewife?
Sure.
There's always a bloke doing
I'm going to own that, thank you. But you were saying something about...
Yeah, there was something about, like, right versus wrong. Like, I don't believe in it. Like, I don't believe that things are right and things are wrong. There is something around that I often speak about in the work that we do that I am into challenging. And I think that it's just, as I said before in my speech, like, there's something about the black and whiteness that I just don't think is realistic in this world. And I think the older I get, although I'm very young, I definitely still feel like it becomes messier. You become more conflated, and I think the earlier you learn that, the easier it gets. And I think there is something around creativity that allows you to play around with that and going, okay, what if? There is something about that what if game that you can play with, something called the yes and game, because two things can be true at once, which I often tell Alicia. But there is something around that I think it can be implemented more in school system and school life, because I guess the way that we have exams, I guess, is based on that. But then, I don't know, I think if there was a different way of looking at that and saying, okay, what are the multiple answers that this can be, then actually how would that affect how we see and view the world, you know, and how does that affect our own critical thinking when we go into adulthood?
Couldn't agree more.
There's something I think really exciting that happens when we put ourselves like at the edges or just past what we know to be possible, and that's where you know, if we're willing to push ourselves over that edge into that mess, or you know, who knows what's going to happen, great learning can come, great theatre can come, great experiences, collaborative experiences can come, and that's not a known place to go. There's not like there's not a destination that we're going to. We're going past the destination that we know to make something exciting. And I think that's what you all did with INNOVATE, pushing past that.
And theatre's really contradictory in its form, isn't it? 'Cause it absolutely has, like, it's the most DIY art form. We make loads of it all the time, really quickly, and you need lots of people together to do it. And we have that you get to those moments of freedom where it's all blurry and but we also have these real restrictions on time. Like we really open a show on time and it goes up at a certain point, and we make work with really tight restrictions around it as well. Yeah. There's something about that combination, which may be a bit like school, you know, that's it's a great combination to coach yourself within. Like, how free can I be within this restriction and this time frame and this limit? And then it's gone. It's gone. There's no record. There's some qualities in there that definitely are transferable.
But I think it's interesting. I think that's what, forgive me, that's what was coming up in what Mel was saying. There's a difference between structure and framing, and there's something about playing with nuance and depth and complexity and ambiguity and contradiction that can be sometimes scary. I'm always mindful of, if you watch small children doing their own innovative play, and the child will say to her, "You're the mommy, I'm a nurse, you're a dog, and he's very sick." And all the children go, and they go. Whereas if you pose the same devising questions to adults, they are like, "What kind of nurse am I?" And when you say sick, how sick? And all of those parameters and constraints do something that kind of gets in the way of sort of those creative processes. But I'm digressing now. So I've got another question, which again we can all just dive into, we can all answer or not, and we can bat it to each other and just say yes and, or yes and no maybe, as we do it. In your opinion, again, what possibilities and challenges do you feel that INNOVATE presents for schools, artists and arts organisations? So what possibilities and challenges does the kind of working process like INNOVATE offer to those cohorts? Anybody can dive in.
There are loads of possibilities. So the possibilities that it presented for INNOVATE were really exciting, and they were both how a lesson and a curriculum or a module could be brought to life, and all of the different ways that world could be recreated. There was loads of possibilities in facilitating. So the interdisciplinary thing really came up in cross-curricular work, And the artists were really able to do that because they made such good relationships with all of the teachers they worked with that and they would then seeing students. It was a real space of privilege that we got to see students in all of their different lessons. So to really understand how they find maths and how they process in food technology and how they are in geography, and to find ways to knit those all together. And that possibility was super exciting. So things like baking a pie for National Pie Day and having a food tech and a maths department collaboration, that was a really exciting possibility for the school. And it meant that teachers that didn't normally interact got to interact and got to think about and share tips and tools. And that, I think that is one of the possibilities that I really enjoyed witnessing come to life.
Thank you, Mel.
Challenge that I really loved in the report is the challenge of behaviour management. Because I think what they beautifully describes is, as artists, you're used to organised chaos and that uncertainty of creation. Whereas the teacher, like, at what point am I going to lose control of this class, and what that feels like, and having had memories, I haven't done it for a long time, being in the school, and just know you've lost it, and you kind of got people crawling up the wall and literally up kind of like gym equipment, and you just, and teachers sort of like terrified, and then they just take control again. But I think that and the teachers say in the report how much they had to just trust that kind of sense of anarchy, and where it kind of enlivens and enriches and gives space that schools don't always manage to enable. And I just thought that feels like what both can learn, because I think, directing is so much about people management. It's so much about, you can have the greatest ideas in the world, but if you can't help those people through the journey of coming to what you envision in your mind, then you're never going to create a piece of theatre to share with an audience. And so those kind of things, like you say, two things can exist and be right and wrong at the same time. It's just fascinating.
And that's physics, that's quantum physics. Just saying. So one of the things that's happening here is we're talking about framing. We're talking about if I'm just drawing together some of the things that are coming out. We're talking about where facilitation might be directing, might be teaching, where they're potentially all performative rather than performances. And I'm saying those things because one of the things that really jumps out for me from the INNOVATE project is it wasn't about going into schools with work that comes from drama to speak to the drama experts in those schools. It was about conversations and dialogue with the teaching teams in those schools about what might be beneficial for them that they can work out, develop together in dialogue with artists who are in the room. Though that's always a bit of a heady term when an artist goes into a school sometimes. But just before we move on to the next question, any other thoughts about the potential that an innovative, innovate approach might bring to schools, to, let me just check my memory, to artists and to arts organisations, since we have all of them here?
I think possibility also, you said potential, possibility and challenge, is that a process like this really makes everyone interrogate their practice really deeply and the values that underpin their practice. So I think everyone involved in INNOVATE came in going, we're behind this idea, theoretically. Then there will have been crunch points when we go, oh, maybe my idea of what we were doing here was different to yours, and we aren't going to give up, so we have to work through this moment, and that's really hard for everyone involved. But because you've built that level of trust, because you did it over that 2-year period, you were able, I imagine, to push through that difficult bit, and that's where change happens, innovation happens, and actually something really special, because you've all really had to go, really keep asking, digging deep, why are we doing this? Why do we believe in it? And where is there convergence in our thinking?
Yeah. And there was definitely times when artists and teachers had to really sit down and be and look at what they've been doing and understand each other's approach. There were some really key moments where the artist's understanding of what was happening and the teacher's understanding of what was happening, or how an activity was going to be delivered, were different. And they had to really they had to really work together and find a way through. And some of the most interesting tools came out of those conversations, and a real shared understanding of each other's aims. and a respect for each other's practice. I think that was what was very special, was that the artists weren't going in and saying, we're going to come and do some art stuff because we're so great and this is what we're going to do, and you're not creative. It was very much like we are both bringing real skills to this. How can those skills interlink and create something brand new?
So in preparation for this, I was just looking at some of those things that might be useful to talk about. And in conversation with Mel, I was talking about a thing that's called the open secret, which has changed its meaning in contemporary discourse. But one of the definitions, there are many, but one of the definitions of it was the open secret was the position that artists sat in, because they could see the world differently. And it was an open secret to them that they could see stuff in a way that perhaps others couldn't. I don't know how useful, productive it is to lock into that, but it's something about the knowledges, the understandings that might be in that space, and that a classroom teacher may be seeing the students and what is happening in the room in one way, and for INNOVATE and for this conversation, an artist, for want of a better term, is seeing something else. Just before we move on to another question, but with that in mind, what kind of potentials, challenges, possibilities might having those two lenses in the same space present to people who are interested in this?
Well, I would say that the best artists do see and don't judge. So it's also, you immediately build trust, don't you? They don't, artists don't judge even their most gruesome characters, do they? So there's something about a super non-judgmental, trusting, open space where therefore that thing you're seeing is interesting to the other person, not challenging.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to come back on that? I think personally the open secret is for a practitioner to go into a space with their plan or their plan in their head and walk into the room and go, no, that's not the plan for this people at this time. And that skill, intuition, ability is present in all of those practitioners. Another question, before we start throwing the space open for questions from the floor, but you're not on the floor, but you know what I mean. How do you think creativity can, love this word now, ignite a curiosity in students that can foster a lifelong love of learning? Easy question again.
Say it one more time, Sylvan. I know the question. Just one more, I wrote the question. Just one more time. Just one more time.
How do you
Oh, yeah,
think...
no, it's true.
Yeah.
I didn't. Shereen did.
Ah,
Maybe you should answer it then.
yes, Shereen.
What was it?
The question is, how do you think creativity can ignite curiosity in students that fosters a lifelong love of learning? It's interesting that you were talking about, in these classes and with these songs, I learnt Spanish. Duolingo for me, but it was songs, right?
Yeah.
Whereas maths, So where might creativity fit in that piece?
Go ahead. So, and also I think it really is important to say that we're not saying that only the artists are creative. The teachers are the teachers and the artists together were creative, but the way that it could ignite curiosity is it was about the approach. It was similar to when we were talking about the Mantle of the Expert and the kind of the history and the what we drew from for this project. It was about creating a world, and that excited a curiosity because those students were really bought into what they were playing. A little bit like what you just said, of when you're little and you're like, you're a dog and you're a nurse. Well, actually in the classroom, that's what they were doing, and they were running with it. We're all science experts on reproduction, but we know that might be a bit awkward, so we're going to stand in a circle and we're going to play these different characters. They bought into it. And I think that's where your curiosity, I think there's a difference between having a world set up for you that you then have, you can go above the limits, like we were saying, you can push past things, you can take risks and understand. That's where the I'm invested comes from. And that's what I think we saw a lot of. We saw a lot of students being, and teachers and the artists, together going on a journey and all being invested in what was going to happen next. And wanting to come back to the next lesson the next week because there was a next step. You know, one of our artists played this great thing. They had to teach drugs, medicinal drugs. And so the artist created a courtroom and dressed up as a judge. and people would have to go on the stand and they'd have to like explain whether it was or wasn't, and there was a gavel, like all that kind of performance and theatricality of it. They were really excited about this lesson and came back for it. I think that's where the curiosity is.
And I would posit that sometimes brilliant teachers are able to create that role environment in their classroom because they have the local power to do it. I'm allowed to ask awkward questions in this space. I'm allowed to say I don't know because that's the role that you're offering me. Before we move on, any other thoughts? Do you want to come back on an answer to that question, or Shereen?
Yeah, I think I would just add to it to say that there is something about the commitment that you make to, like you yourself as the facilitator in a space when you are delivering in a school, where you kind of just have to commit to whatever it is, and people generally just go with you. And I feel like that applies to life. Half of the things that I curate in the delivery of what we do in taking part, I am just blagging it. And then I tell Lucy, and I look convinced, and she says, okay. So I feel like I use that same approach. The thing is, Sylvan, if I'm being real, like I'm actually a big kid, and I'm just like applying the same models I apply to my everyday life to everything that we do in our programs. So I very much believe in like freedom and exploration and creativity and feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And so I feel like that for me came from the playfulness that I was afforded when I was young, and that came from me being someone who came through the arts. Like I absolutely was like that, you know, I was in love with drama from a very young age before I even knew what it was, when I was just into soaps, and my mum says I was only wanting to see real people when she tried to put on cartoons. And so, you know, the Barbies were doing a lot of stuff, but they were performing and they were exploring, and therefore it went through school, and it was like, as you know, Sue's favourite word, it's the golden thread throughout my life, is that allowance of creativity. And I think to me that's what happens when you have someone who is a youth theatre kids running then a department. It's like, oh great, I just want to recreate everything that I find was like fun and helped me learn as someone that wasn't interested in anything else but drama as I was growing up. And I feel like that's what got through me through my life. So I feel like the application to that same thought process, because I'm still in that brain mind frame of mind, I'm just like, oh, okay, cool, that should then apply to everything that we do, that should apply to the training that we do, that should apply to the application to our delivery, that should apply to even the people that we hire to deliver, that should have that same train of thought. And I don't think that's something that we explore enough. I think the limitations of life stop us from having that broad thinking, and there is something about it applying to that in our delivery within schools, and also acknowledging the fact that like schools are an institution that are different to how we deliver. Like our parameters are different to their parameters, and so you have to respect where someone's coming from so you can meet them where they are.
Absolutely. I think what's wonderful about the project is it didn't ever set itself up to be a tell project. Okay, schools, you're getting it all wrong, so we brought the artists in to fix it for you.
Yeah.
It was always I wonder what would happen if, which is the epitome of research for me.
From the beginning, even in regards to how we were approaching the information to teachers, how we were letting students know it had to still be in the wording of the school, and that's why it was a case of partnering with two schools, making it bespoke. It had to be something that was feeling like a true partnership rather than us just going in and doing workshops every now and again. It had to feel like something that was like a united thing and a conceited offer that felt like it hit in duality of how we exchange our own practice and our own learning, our own understanding of each other. It's kind of like a partnership, or like, you know, a 2-year relationship where you're like, okay, cool, we're going to make this work, but we have to learn from each other in doing that, and find compromise where we can. And I think that's how we could make that happen, you know?
And I think that it lives some of the values that were spoken about at the very beginning of this presentation today, about it had to be a partnership. There was a relationship. It had to be in place. You couldn't just go in and transactionally deliver this.
Yeah.
And your challenge about saying, to those people that don't happen to be in those localities, if we want to do this, they can do this, but maybe some of those things need to be considered. I'm going to open it up so that people can pose some questions. What I'm loving is that hands are flying up, but I'm still talking now just to give others whose thinking time is at a different cadence to those whose hands have shot in the air. My new divergence says it does it, yeah. And there's a mic here, doing my thing. So the mic is going to come to you. So I saw this question here, and then there's one here, so 1, 2. But others, be thinking of questions. I think we've got a bit of time for a number. So first hand up, sir. Can you put your questions up so we can get to it? Great.
Sorry.
You've got a beatbox on it now that you've spoken to.
Oh.
And if we can ask those people to pass the mic on, and we have this like baton passing as well.
Thanks, everybody. So I've got to leave pretty soon after I speak. Sorry about that. Just some observations based on that. I think that the reason there's a real affinity between children, young people, and artists is because they all live in the periphery. Children and young people don't have any agency in this country. They don't really have any agency at school. They can't vote. They have to do what their parents or carers tell them to do. They have to do what their teachers tell them to do. And when you were speaking, Sylvan, about Open Secret, what artists and children and young people have in common again is that they see the world differently. They are able to query, they're able to sort of queer the status quo by sort of asking disruptive questions or difficult questions. They are deviant. Children and young people and artists are all deviant. And that's where the challenge comes in with the school parameters, as Shereen was saying, because schools aren't used to that deviance. Schools try to, kick out that deviance. And so sometimes in schools, they are the most binary place you can be. I did a schools project in a school in Whitechapel recently. The school was rated outstanding by Ofsted, by the way. In this school, it was literally so binary. Boy, girl, big signs everywhere. Do this, don't do this. The thing about theatre and art is it is not binary. It is anti-binary. It's sort of like trying to nail custard to the wall, right? It's kind of a messy creative disruption. And so I think that that's some of the challenges that exist when you're taking creative and artistic projects into schools, is that it's completely out of the methodologies of most teachers. What doesn't help that as well, of course, is that most members of staff in senior leadership teams don't come from arts backgrounds. They come from, geography, maths, sciences backgrounds, because people that go into schools to teach art or to teach drama, their intention isn't to become a deputy head or a head teacher. Their intention is to share joy. And so that's where I think some of the other challenges come into play. How do you disrupt status quo ways of thinking and doing and making with some teachers who are not prepared to meaningfully co-create? They are not prepared to share power with the most powerless in society, which is children and young people. Oh, should be our question time, shouldn't I?
That was very BBC.
So I'm just going to clarify. Like, we're talking about the sociology of deviance here, right? A deviant as an alternative thinking set that's in there. How can we evoke a space at a school that allows those teachers who are in a range of teaching disciplines to consider doing things differently, and in collaboration with artists, maybe? How might we do that?
I always say that, it's interesting that I would apply that to both teachers and just people generally. I feel like what I'm hearing is there's a barrier and I need to figure out a way to circumvent that barrier to get what I want. That's what I hear. So for me, I don't know if it's my job to necessarily convince the unconvincible. I feel like there's always going to be loopholes in every circumstance that you make. And so there is a version of, I think, of what we're doing that doesn't, to me, sit in trying to convince anybody of anything. I'm not doing magic. I'm not trying to convince you that, I'm pulling something out of a hat. If you are seeing the facts and you're seeing the research and you're saying, okay, cool, I still don't like this, cool, tell me who is, and I'll meet that person where they're at and I'll have a chat with that person, because in this life, I cannot be taking paracetamol for somebody else's headache. I cannot. Soft life has to be running, and I just feel like that there is all, if anything, it's sitting in a place of going, okay, I need to invest in that teacher to become that head teacher, to become that deputy head, to become in the position of power, to talk to them about how leadership works, and bide my time. That's how I personally feel, but everyone else might feel different.
I have to say, thinking about our Innovate schools, other schools that we work with, the only time there might have been I'm not sure about this, there's always a reason behind that. And it's always something that we've been able to discuss or move past or find a way through. So that could be something like, and this is in the report too, one of the teachers who I think this was super brave was like, at the beginning, I was just like, my classroom was going to be really noisy, and what if my boss walks in and I've got a really noisy classroom? But actually we could work through that and look at the different way we were doing activities together. But there wasn't really, I don't think I've ever come across a block from a teacher or SLT that is not something that we could discuss and that doesn't have a root that when I sit and understand, and I think this is going back to an artist listens, watches, observes, never judges, that we haven't been able to find a way through. And actually all of the teachers, even the ones that really wanted to understand how this would look in their classroom and really wanted to understand what that looked like for teaching time and what that looked like for how they were kind of moving young people through the curriculum. They all gave their time, and it was an art subject, like it was science, it was maths, and they really showed a commitment. And then it was about us then showing I suppose the respect and the kind of the reciprocity of that, of going, and this is why, and this is what will happen. And then little by little, as they saw different things working, that got more traction, because then that story could be shared with somebody else, and that story could be shared with another department.
But I think that works specifically in those schools because we, from the beginning, said we need to have buy-in from those head teachers. Yeah. And so it's sitting in a place where, like you were saying, is that if you don't have those head teachers, that how do you convince them? Like, then you move on to the people that you can, and then it spreads. But I definitely think you have to, in my opinion, have buy-in from the top. But I think on both sides, I think if we didn't have buy-in from our CEO, then it also wouldn't make sense. So I do think that, because it does trickle down, and there's always going to be people who's like, I'm not really into this. And that's okay, because sometimes I don't feel like working either, but I have a boss and I have to do what I have to do. That's how it goes. And so you have to sit in a place of realism as well as like idealism of how things can go, and you know how things work. And so you go, cool, let me speak to the people that I know is going to implement system where you're able to do your best work, because there's no point talking to them if they're not, And
then, sorry, last thing that I would say is, what I've also sometimes said to a teacher that has asked me, that is from a different school, of like how I want to know how I can have this conversation with SLT. I've connected them to the SLT from one of the Innovate schools, because actually I think having that conversation when you both have similar priorities, you both maybe have a school in a similar size, like I think that actually is a more useful conversation.
I think that's the respect piece that's in Innovate. There was an understanding and acceptance from both sides that trust had to be in there, because it might be that the SLT is managing so many priorities that they don't feel safe enough telling you about, so they just say no. But if you can get to that place to go like, okay, but I'm curious about why. Curious, that's critical thinking, isn't it? Easy for me to say. But I'm curious about why you just said no and not heard something. Or what happens when you have an artist in your room and you want to say, actually, the reason why I was blocking this is because I was worried that they would show me up, Hugely fascinating. There is another question.
Oh, I've got a microphone. In fact, it was a contribution rather than a question. I was involved with education at the Young Vic before, Shereen, you were here. And I worked with young people who were young offenders. And a number of them were in essentially what was a children's prison, and they were allowed out to come and do work with me. And, they'd just fallen off the edge everywhere, and their lives were chaotic. And some were awaiting trial for some very famous, terrible crimes that they'd committed. But we used to come to the Young Vic very often. And when we would have things whereby someone would do a terrible thing, they'd punch someone in the face, then my answer to that was, you're not coming next time. But miss, no, you're not coming next time. And then we'd come the next time. And they may well have been on that. And what happened with those young people who'd missed huge amounts of education and you know, terrible things had happened to them, and they'd done terrible things to other people was, they became so articulate because they came to the Young Vic to see a variety of amazing things, and then they became expert on that. And then they were saying to me, well, these seats aren't as good as the last seats we had, were they? And they are becoming really able to express themselves well. And I remember once there was a play here called Monkey, and I was with some young offenders, and one of them I thought was going to faint. They stopped breathing because people were all around them. And then another time, we were here, and the cafe has always been where it was. And we walked past, and I could see Ian McKellen was in the cafe with a woman I later found out was his agent. And I'd heard him say the day before, oh, I love young people. Oh, yes, I've been doing all Shakespeare, but I love young people. And I got them all to troop in. And they went, oh, he's that. And I said, do you want to talk to him? Get him your flyer. And then I stood with him while he signed it. And then we went to see the play. He was doing what he was. But the following sort of 2 or 3 weeks, let me tell you, Ian McKellen gets out and about. Every night he was on the news in some opening or something because he was the guy who turned up at everything. And every time I would say to those kids, he got paid to do that, you know. You know that thing we saw him at? We were his equal. Now, as the years go on, you know, schools are more chaotic than they've ever been. Education is a sausage factory. There is no thinking. There's only regurgitating facts. And I'm talking about secondary and beyond. There's only regurgitating. So we don't even teach children how to think, which is just terrible. And then they become adults who don't know how to think. And the great thing about the Young Vic is, if ever I see any of those young people, some of whom are doing life sentences, but they are out, and they will say to me, remember when we used to go and do all of those things? And it became so ordinary for them to be here amongst people like the people who are here. It just changed their lives completely.
Thank you. I'm curious to think about these young people going like, yeah, I met Gandalf yesterday. Yeah, it's great. Thank you very much.
At the opening of everything, I missed. Did you see him on the telly last night, that guy we saw?
It's because he can do magic.
He'll do anything for a free drink, that fella.
He can do magic. Are there any other questions? I'm going to take this one here, really close, because the mic can go on, and then I see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One of the things I thought reading the INNOVATE report and hearing you speak tonight is that there was a really equal partnership between the artists who were going into schools and the teachers that they were meeting, and that's always delightful to see. And just going back to your original question around education and learning, it feels very much like the project was based on there are ingredients in theatre and there are ingredients in learning, and what's important is the hypothesis that you put around those and how you ask the questions, which is all what you've been talking about. Now, you know, I'm a massive advocate for that, obviously. However, I just want to ask whether anybody on the panel does think, even though perhaps it's rather old-fashioned in outreach or education, I hate that word, I don't know why I just said outreach, sorry, but in education now, just to give young people a different landscape to live in, a different world to exist in, whether that's watching a piece of theatre, whether that's being allowed to just be in another place for a while. And is there still a role for that in creative education, or is it gone? And we're now all about participation and about having creativity in science subjects or math subjects, or as well as in drama.
Is the question, is there still a space for an invitation for young people to inhabit temporarily a different space, a different landscape? Or has that gone under the guise of everything having to be immersive, participatory, engaged? Is there space just to be someone else, be Gandalf for 10 minutes?
I don't know, Lucy, is there?
Yes, of course there is.
I don't necessarily believe that they're mutually exclusive.
They're not mutually exclusive.
So you don't think they're mutually exclusive? Why not?
Because I think what we're talking about here in INNOVATE is like the role of the theatre in our community in its broadest sense. So we're talking about it being a house for everyone to come in and immerse themselves in a different world, a different experience for a period of time, to experience a version of the world that isn't theirs, everyone. But there's also these other arms of things that we do, and actually the work that we do in our participate read departments, in our education, in our work in schools, should feed into what happens on our stages and vice versa. So I do think they kind of have to happen together. I think it would have been strange if you'd done a project like Innovate and the young people never came to just watch a show and that be that, because that's what we do here and it's all part of the same thing.
Yeah, I think young people are, with technologies and other things that are happening in society currently, much more performative than they would have been 10 years ago. Whenever I'm out and about, I'm very young about that hard life. Whenever I'm out and about, I can see young people with cameras doing something, on the train, on the escalator, taking pictures of their dinner. They want to be performative and demonstrative around stuff. So I think it's really interesting that there's a frame around that which might happen to be called a theatre. Other thoughts, opinions, before we take another question? I don't know how much time we have left yet, so I'll be told. My neurodivergence and time are not friends.
How much time do we have?
20 minutes, really. Great, comfy. Plenty of questions coming. So this thing about a new space, a different space, a space of potentially respite from some of the other stuff. Is that available? Would Innovate want that? Do schools want that? I'm making up questions.
I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but surely that's the kind of beauty of taking part, in that there's participation strand, there's a learning strand, and there's a strand for people over the age of 25 who are just human beings. So that actually...
human beings
generally. Is that actually, somebody who Mel has come across through Innovate could end up in the participation strand, because that is a space where you can just sort of be an outside of school. And I think there's something really interesting. I think you might want to qualify what you're saying.
sorry.
Just behind you.
Sorry, really quickly, hold it. But I think the research brilliantly concentrated on the idea of artists in the classroom. And I guess I wonder what the research would be around children suspending their disbelief and living in the different worlds of a piece of theatre, and what that does for curiosity and collaboration and co-construction, and whether that is a possibility for a piece of research, I guess, is my question. Sorry, it wasn't very clear first time.
It's a lovely question. Are there any funders in the building? Again, I think they are not necessarily mutually, in my opinion, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. The best teachers I remember and I've encountered in my work are those ones who endow that ability on a student, who can say, in this room, I can be the person who can answer or ask questions. And I may not be able to be that role anywhere else other than until the bell goes. And I think that might be the coming together of what you're saying. Whether it needs to have the additional containment of being a theatrical frame, I don't know. It is an interesting piece of research. Other question? You've got time. There's one there, there's one there, there's one there. Please help me remember because I'm dyspraxic. Thank you.
Hiya, thanks. I'm primarily a facilitator, and my underlying practice is about treating my participants as experts in their own experiences. A lot of the work I do has no reason to be creative. It's around domestic abuse, and it's learning about that and moving forward from it. But I think a lot of the practice of being an expert in your own experience is very similar to the practice you're talking about of having the right to be playful, because the core of both of it is pushing the power back to the participants and taking it away from whoever's holding the space. But I would like to know specifically what you think is different between that, because it's the same core, but what is it that your guys have been doing for the last 2 years that is the bit that's unique to you, that is successful? Like, what is the playfulness bit? I want to steal it.
How do you think Innovate open spaces for play, for playfulness?
I think by the nature of looking at a piece of, looking at a module or looking at a piece of curriculum, an artist and a teacher together, and then identifying, usually they'd have an inquiry question. So they'd have the content, but they'd also know something about that class. And it could be, one of them was the year 8s in one of the schools were struggling to understand grid references. So they knew for that particular term that was the thing they needed to work on. And the artist was a dance artist. So she came up with a TikTok-inspired dance that would teach grid references and that would like map out a compass too at some point. And so between her and the teacher, there was that exchange of the subject knowledge, then the artist taking that information and trying to make that into something. And then it was about an experiment. And they were both on board, the teacher and the artist were both on board with, this is an experiment. We'll try it, it might work. It did work. Ooh. And then they used that to then put into next academic year's set of teaching materials for that particular thing. And it was rolled out to other Year 8 classes. So that is that answering the question? I suppose it's about finding an opportunity in what it is you are asking those young people to do, or what it is they are being taught. And finding an opportunity to come at it from a different perspective that facilitates greater understanding. Did that answer the question? I don't know if it did. Oh.
I've lost where our next question was. I think it was over here. Yeah. It was over here. Yeah. Loud and proud so we can get the mic to you.
There's a mic
Yeah, the mic's coming. It's interesting, I think, while the mic's moving, I would summarise this by, if you ask somebody a question and they say, I don't know, maybe that framing and that body swerve is, yeah, but if you did know, what would you say? How do you make that offer open and attractive to somebody when there's a structure that we spoke about earlier, which is like, why don't you know? You should know. Clearly, if you don't know, you're stupid. I'm just flanneling until you ask your question.
Hi, I'm Shanti. I work at the Unicorn Theatre. My question, I apologise in advance, it's a little bit of a boring question, but I'm genuinely interested to know the answer. I haven't read the report yet, so if the answer's in the report, again, I haven't had time to read it. I'm interested in evaluation, because I've always grappled with that question of how do we measure happiness. So I'm wondering if you... what your monitoring and evaluation processes are through the project, like how do you gather feedback, if you gather feedback, how you gather that feedback, and what you're measuring, because sometimes I find in the projects I run, we want to find out sort of what outcomes they're getting in terms of their well-being, but also connected to school curriculum as well. So I'm in primary schools, not secondary as you are, and I always feel like it's quite elusive. How are we measuring happiness? And I'm just curious to know how you guys might be doing it.
How do we measure happiness? And does it have an impact?
I wish we'd been measuring happiness.
I think you will.
But do you mean literally?
Yeah, almost literally. How do you gather your feedback? I'm just really curious to know.
So we commissioned Royal Holloway to research the whole of the INNOVATE project. So we had an incredible researcher, Dr. Yvonne Robinson, and she would go into the schools. She would be present for the planning between the teachers and the artists. She would be in the classrooms during the lessons that were being delivered. She interviewed students, she interviewed teachers, she interviewed the whole team. She was really a part of the fabric of the project. And that was how, so it was research as opposed to evaluation. And that piece of research kind of unpacks everything, and the aims kind of evolved over the course of the research.
And we're talking more about the research on Wednesday as well, so we don't want to take too many, because Helen, I see in the corners there, is looking like, hold on, you're taking from my whole speech. So definitely we're going to talk about more there, but I feel like in regards to generally evaluation, because I think that's a general contentious thing, because it's a balance of being able to go, how much are you evaluating for your own practice, and then how much are you evaluating because you need to feed back to a funder, and then how much are you evaluating that sits in a place that feels ethical as well. And I struggle with all of those things, because I'm just like, let people be, my gosh. But I think that it goes back to what I was talking about in regards to our measure of success, and there's some things that you can measure in regards to just the feedback of those young people and what they're saying in that moment, and you monitoring that. So in regards to how we even set up with the young associates, they, not the young associates, project associates, what they would do is that they would, after every session, they would write a kind of feedback around what happened in that session, feedback that they got. We also would have regular catch-ups with the teachers. We would have regular check-ins with those project associates. We'd have regular check-ins with the advisory panel. So there was a lot of oral communication around the evaluation and noted down things, rather than it being a case of giving a form to a young person going, how happy are you today versus how happy are you in December? I'm not very happy in December. So that's not always going to work for me. So I don't know how then you're expected for a child to tick something and then you're like, oh, okay, cool, that's the kind of measure of happiness. But that wasn't the measure of success for us. It was a case of going, do you feel like you have a level of understanding of this? Do you feel like you want to come to school? You feel like you're excited about learning? And I feel like that goes alongside the version of quote-unquote happiness, because I think it's so bespoke what happiness is, and there's so many things that we don't have any control of what's going to indicate that person's happiness. It would be kind of unfair in a way, because they might love school, they might love the program, but something outside of school happens on that day that impacts that specific evaluation. And so I don't know how I feel personally about how reliable kind of paper evaluation is in that way, and a measurement of that in that way is. And I feel like the way that we've done it in regards to research and observation over a longer period of time, and a multi-agency way of observation as well, has been more impactful for the way that we have grown and learned in the work that we have done, so that it's sitting in a place that's a bit more broad in its scope. Yeah, does that make sense? Or?
Just the kicker to that might be, it's interesting that some of these, I would argue that some of these things can be assessed, but there's also a parallel conversation about how you interpret whatever data set you've got, because it might be that happiness is 8, but it might also be orange. So what do you do with that? So you might get some clear data sets and some clear data points and some indicators, but how you then interpret and comprehend those is another piece of work in itself. And that links back to that ecology that Shereen was talking about. Is this for the funder? Is this for us? Is this right? We can go to the next question.
Yeah, I think there was a mention earlier about following the young people around their classrooms. And so I've worked with teachers before, kind of a bit of a program manager. And I suppose I've always tried to find the cross-subject collaboration and help the teacher to do that. But it sounds like you've taken it, you start with the young people and then it kind of emerges. Is that right?
In terms of how they would work out who they were working with or what they'd be doing with the teacher?
Like which subjects do you so there's a group of... Yeah.
So following the young people around the class, that was for the listening days. So that was part of our kind of research at the beginning, kind of really understanding the culture of both schools, was that all of the artists spent a day going into lessons and experiencing school and experiencing the lessons of those Year 7 and Year 8 students. And that was the year groups that we were working in both schools. And from there, that began conversations between the different subject departments, between different teachers. That's where there was the beginnings of inquiry questions. There was the beginnings of, this is what's really important to us. This is where we feel like we'd like some more support. This is what we want to look at exploring. Then there was, some of it was very practical to begin with. So that might be very practically assigned that this particular artist will be in this subject for this term, and it paired with a teacher. And then that teacher and artist would have planning time together, and they would then embark on their own approach to delivering the curriculum and the content for that period of time. And then they would move to a different department. And sometimes it would be that they'd be in the same department for a little bit longer because it felt like actually there was a really interesting fit and there was lots coming up, and they moved to different teachers amongst that department.
So then it was still quite very fluid. They would figure out whether it was a match, and then...
It was fluid in the sense, so that we had a lead contact in each school that was at SLT level, and then so there was some support in kind of going how you would move through the departments through the academic year. But then if it felt like we had a moment with one artist and teacher in English, and it actually felt like this group were doing so well and there was a lot coming from it, and we felt actually they need a bit more time together. So there was a degree, there was a kind of blueprint, there was a map, and then there was some flexibility in that map.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes.
10 minutes, great. So I need to prevail on you to be really honest and go, who was the next with their hand up? Because I'm forgetting the route here. There's one over there, and then we're going to come across there, I think, and then there. Yeah.
Hi. I have two questions. The first is probably in your report. but it was how did you approach the schools, and what would you say was the most appealing part of the innovative program, I'm going to call it, that drew schools in? And the second thing was, as an artist, I'm quite political and open, and when we think about art, we think about, when I think about my rehearsal room, I bring up safe space a lot. And when I think of a classroom, I don't feel like, I particularly had an interesting time at school, so when I think of a classroom, I don't feel like it's political or open to debate, and I don't feel like it's a safe space. So how do you merge the two together? And how do we, as artists, work with teachers rather than against them to create something really amazing for young people?
How did you approach the schools, and how did you make that approach attractive? And is there a space to make the classroom safe and potentially political?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't feel like classrooms are really open to debate. So how do you teach a subject? And it's like what you were saying, that there's not a right or wrong answer. So how do you open it up to the multiple different answers? Or how do you work with a teacher to open a space up to that kind of environment, discussions in topics?
Yeah.
I love the 9-questionness of that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So I was involved in the INNOVATE project right at the beginning, and I suppose it's interesting because a lot of conversation around the rigidity of schools and approaches to teaching has come up, and I think it's really important for us to really celebrate teachers and schools, and particularly the ones that we were working with in INNOVATE, because actually they're working within a system that is often quite constrictive, if you like, and that is difficult for them as well as for the students. And I think when we put this project out into the world to all schools in Southwark and Lambeth, we were like, we're interested in I think it came up like, what would it be like if, we were looking for schools who were up for going, we're interested in bringing creative approaches, theatrical or cross-arts approaches into the classroom to look at different subject matters that aren't art subjects. And we want to go on a journey with people who are up for coming along on a journey where you don't know where we're going to end up. So I think the transparency of the ask was really important at the beginning. We were like, this is what we're here to do. We're going to throw things up in the air and we don't know where it's going to land, and we're inviting schools to come on board with us. So we put sort of initial call for expressions of interest out that said that, and then we had individual conversations with senior leaders in schools saying, this is what this is. We're not bringing a finished package. We want to go on a research journey with you, and we want you to be open to taking risk. We're going to take some risk, and we want the young people to come in on that journey and take some risk with us as well. So I think in answer to what you're talking about, the dynamics within the classroom, I think we went in straight away with going, this is going to be an exploratory space, quite political in some ways, because we're throwing usual structures, power structures up in the air. So we were really open about that from the beginning, and I guess we interrogated schools to make sure that they understood that, and they were up for that. And that's not to say that there weren't moments when we go, oh, we don't know if we're up for it to that extent. But yeah, so I think, in short, the answer was a really, really open, transparent invitation to be part of something that we didn't know the answer to, and a real clarity around the fact that actually we want to shake things up with you, and we're not going to come in and just work within your systems that already exist, because we're interested in pulling some of that apart.
Mm-hmm. So maybe the offer itself is countercultural, that's political, and interesting. And certain schools would not be in a place where they could accept that. I'm in a school where I've got to turn the Ofsted around. I can't be in that research environment, even though I might love the aspiration. Does that go somewhere? We haven't answered the space, safe, politics.
I want to make sure I've understood it. So how do we make a safe space for us to explore between the artist, the teacher and the students?
Yeah, maybe I asked it a bit weird, but it's all looking at like the relationship between the arts and the schools, and how do we nurture it and not invade their space, but also just...
Okay.
We both, basically, it's about joining together and for the young people's sake. I don't know.
No, that's it. I think it was just that the artist went with... Everybody went with the intention of collaboration and not, I'm going to come and do this thing to you, or I'm going to come and do this thing in the classroom. It was really genuine collaboration. And it was genuinely, it was a conversation. It was a, what's happening in your classroom right now? What is it that you're going to teach them? Okay, let me think on my practice and where that aligns, or what I can bring to this. And okay, this is my offer. And then the teacher had an opportunity to go, I'm not too sure about that. What do you think about this? So it was a really, we went there very transparently and also very honestly of like, this is a collaboration and we respect your practice and we think there's something really interesting about when we come together.
I guess what's also in there is there's the teachers' priorities, the artistic priorities, what's going on in the world and how they can all be brought together and if they should and how that affects the mechanics of the school. All of that's up for grabs and can be interrogated in a project like this, I think. Does that go some way to answering the question? I hope it does. We've got 5 minutes, so 2 pithy questions, I think. There's one here and one, oh my, I don't know, I can't remember.
I think after that, like, we've got a networking period, so like everyone can come up and just chat to us in that period. So just these last 2 and then we'll have...
So we're going to go here, thank you, Shereen. We're going to go here and behind you here.
Yeah.
Others, please note those questions and just come and speak to people.
Yeah.
So mine's not a question. I just wanted to touch base on a couple of things that people have said. Now, I've been in quite a great position. I've worked with Mel over the past couple of years on separate projects in the school. And just to pick up on how people are talking about what was a unique selling point, I think what Young Vic do very well is picking artists that are very relatable to the students that they are going to be delivering to. I work in an alternative provision. Some of our students have probably never seen drama or thought that it was something that was for them. Mel and the team come in and worked relentlessly with our students who at first did sort of back away from working together, and the safe space was created instantly where they were able to be themselves. They were able to have a space where they didn't have any restrictions. That curiosity, that critical thinking came out instantly, which made our previous 2 projects a complete success, where at the end, it was mess. Don't get me wrong. There was a lot of mess from all the way through. But in the end, as you said before about being on time and knowing what they were doing, it clicked and it came together. So for those of you that are either thinking about working with them or have done before, it's just everything that you've asked is already there, and Mel, the team, work really relentlessly with teachers to ensure that it is right for them and for the students, and the collaboration is there all the way through. So I just wanted to say thank you, one, for inviting me in today, and everything that people have been asking, I've been there, worked with it firsthand, and everything that they're saying is definitely true and fantastic. So thank you.
And I think what's implicit within that is that even if it gets messy, crunchy, you stuck with it. This was a 2-year research project. So it's not, I'm not feeling it, yeah, we're gone. It's kind of like, I'm not feeling it. I wonder why I'm not feeling it. Are you not feeling it? And maybe then something comes from it. Our closing question before we all...
Oh, the pressure.
Canapes.
Hi. Congratulations, this sounds incredibly exciting. I've been working in arts-based learning for the last few years, and the success is just so apparent when it works and when it's done well. And I've heard teachers say it, I've witnessed young people experiencing it, and I think anyone who works in participatory arts knows the value of it, and we've to spend so much time and energy proving that value to funders or to SLT, but we know that it works. And I'm just wondering how we get it to the policymakers, to the, you know, how, because I feel like Ofsted don't necessarily value the work. They're not interested. They're kind of interested in the SPAG and the results, and we can see the value in everything else. So, yeah, I'm just curious to know how we kind of could make changes on a national level where there's budget set aside for these types of projects, because they're incredible and important.
Huge question. Yeah, you did great there, thanks. What do you think, folks? How do we maximise the potential of this, as a summary of this, to those people who may not be invested in its benefits? I think it does go back into something you've already said, Shereen, but...
Around like policy?
No, just there's something about there is a limit to how much energy should be deployed in trying to get people to play who don't want to play. But if we take that on to the next stage, there's lots of benefit, outcomes, impacts that arose from this work. How do we advocate about that in a way that means it might grow or be legible to those people who don't see it in and of itself?
I'll try and do this short, but I think we just need to keep doing it. And it's a little bit like the evaluation question, I think, actually. If senior leaders are changing what they do when Ofsted come in to try and fit that model, then it's going to carry on how it is. If senior leaders are going, this is what we're doing today, come in and see it, and we think it provides a good education, pedagogical base for our young people, end of story. If we just keep doing what we're doing as arts organisations and tell our funders, this is what we're doing, you can see the value of it qualitatively, we're not going to tick your boxes. The more we're brave, collectively, the more we do that, the more things will change. And I think that's hard. It's a slow process, but I just think we have to play our game and wait till they see it, rather than try and play their game, but also kind of do our game on the side, if that makes sense to anyone.
It makes complete sense, but there's also sort of a wider argument, isn't it, that schools are created to create the citizens that our society wants, and actually we need to start at that real basis, which is, you know, you're churning out people to kind of go and work in call centres or to be kind of good citizens who will get a mortgage or whatever. And I think in some ways we have to think about the values of our society and who we're electing, because what happens in education is completely up to how they consider we should be as a society. And sometimes we're trying to create an idol in a kind of capitalist construct. And we need to really see that, you know, it's great, keep doing the things, but actually we need to look higher to really change people's thinking in terms of what they think we are as human beings and what we need as a society, because then that will change. Because, you know, I think we have been a bit down on the teachers, and the teachers are actually just doing the best that they can within the system in which they find themselves, because that is imposed. They didn't create that system. Most of them don't want that system, and therefore we have to fundamentally change the basics in order to liberate ourselves, so that going into schools and creating amazing, vibrant, creative experiences are just the norm, and at the minute they're not. They're the exception, and that's what we need to fundamentally change. It does feel like Newsnight now, doesn't it?
But also, and to really push that Newsnight moment to the end, I think there's a cautionary thing that we need to be alive to. It's brilliant what you were saying about it was really messy and rough in that school, and they came in. And then eventually, the young people started to be on time and started to be engaged. I think that is fantastic. But to enable that second half to happen, it's really important that we don't disaggregate it from the first half. And that when people come in and go like, okay, we need a project that gets kids to turn up on time and engage. Because I think it works through creative practices because of those two elements. And when the commissioners come and say, let's do an attendance project, that's when I get scared as a researcher and a practitioner. There are liquids of various kinds and various strengths. There are things on sticks that can be eaten, I believe. We're coming to the end of our time, and I want to thank the fantastic panel, the Young Vic, and you yourselves for engaging in this conversation and sharing of yourselves and engaging with the report, more of which will be said over the week. You've been fabulous, and now we've finished. Thank you very much.